This is the Westside Barbell Podcast. I'm Tom Barry. With me is Burley Hawk. Burley, how are you?
Good, Tom. How are you?
Good. Today's topic that I think we'll dive into is dynamic effort. And what we'll do is I'll throw it to you to go through the traditional dynamic effort phases, if you could. Can you give a quick overview of what dynamic effort is and its purpose?
The purpose of dynamic effort is to lift submaximal weights at maximal velocity with the intent of improving rate of force development.
How does it work?
We take a athlete's max. We find the percentage-based training. It's all percentage-based training. So, for instance, with the squat, we'll go 75, 80, 85%. That's with 25% accommodating resistance, which is constant throughout the 3 weeks. We find the most relevant max based on the barbell we're using. And then over the course of the 3 weeks, the athlete will slightly escalate training weights in a wave fashion, 3-week wave fashion. The intent is to keep, like I said, submaximal weights with maximal velocity. We try to target 0.8 meters per second. Sometimes it can be a little slower than that. As long as it's not tremendously slower than that, the rep can be acceptable. We're always shooting for 0.8 meters per second. And like I said, we go 3-week wave based off of the most relevant max. And then once the next 3-week wave comes around, we usually change out specialty bar, change out accommodating resistance, and start the process over again.
Why is it important for powerlifters?
For powerlifters, Lou and I used to talk about max effort training, and obviously max effort training will yield the greatest results, particularly for a strength athlete. However, as the Bulgarians showed, we can't train max effort all the time and expect athletes to survive the training. So the dynamic effort allows us to train at slightly lighter or lower intensity levels and still make gains that contribute to the ability to express absolute strength. So if we're training max effort and we're making gains in absolute strength, we want that's top level force output. So we want to use the dynamic effort method to allow the athlete to reach that top level of force output at the fastest rate possible.
How many days a week is it done?
The traditional day, like I said, we do 4-day on the powerlifting side of things. It's 2 dynamic effort training days, dynamic effort lower, and the dynamic effort upper.
And can you give a quick overview of how a workout would look like?
Yeah, so dynamic effort lower, we'll start with like I said, I talked about kind of the wave scheme, the set and rep scheme. It's a 12 set, 10 set, 8 set squat workout over the course of the 3 weeks. It's always to a box. Specialty bars will vary. Accommodating resistance used will vary. However, it'll always be at that 25%. And then with the dynamic effort upper, we follow a fixed set and rep scheme of 9x3 over the course of the 3 weeks. Same scheme as far as the wave escalation over the 3 weeks. Training intensities will escalate. And then once again, it's all about on the lower body days, we're trying to improve the rate of force development in the squat and the deadlift. And then on the upper days, it's obviously focused on pressing, bench press, overhead press. I should say, obviously, we stick to the bench press. However, say if you're training for strongman or something, you can perform dynamic effort upper with a overhead press.
Can beginners use dynamic effort? Is there a certain level of strength you should have before you use it?
I would say it's best to build a base before you get into dynamic effort training, just to make sure that you have the ability to execute the methods as they should be executed. So the biggest thing is the ability to maintain technique while trying to lift a submaximal weight at the maximal velocity. Most beginners won't have the ability. Of course, if you have a beginner that's an athlete and they have some sort of prior training, they can sometimes jump in a little sooner, but a lot of times it's best, 6 months or a year, build a base of strength before you jump into dynamic effort training, just to make sure the training can be executed properly.
And you've written blogs. We got blogs on this.
Many blogs on dynamic effort, particularly in the realm of getting started with dynamic effort. So yeah, the website would be a great resource.
Is that where you'd starting dynamic effort at the best?
Yeah. So if you get on the website and check out the blogs, there's a base building dynamic effort, and then there's a just starting conjugate series where it covers some dynamic effort. And it goes in not just the general programming structure, but also just tips and tricks to make your training more effective. But yeah, those resources would give a clear depiction of how a beginner should, when they're ready, begin dynamic effort training.
So we wanted to give an overview of where or how dynamic effort is used within the powerlifters.
Yes.
And then what I want to do is go over how we've taken that foundation of everything that Louis put down and used within the athlete community.
Yes.
So without going too deep into the history, the problem that was given is that athletes have other disciplines to train. Mm-hmm. So we have them for 3 days a week. We've had them for 2, we've had them for 5, 5 days a week took away from the skill. 2 days a week, we weren't getting enough stimulus. So we landed on 3 main days. That's 2 max effort days, 1 max effort upper, 1 max effort lower, and that left dynamic effort to be combined into 1 day. And that's what we now call the dynamic effort combined day, where we're taking all the parts of lower and upper, combine them into a workout. And the reason we have done this is it has added a lot more intensity and density to the athlete training. And we're able to get the stimulus of, depending on the strength, explosive strength or speed strength for the upper and lower body within a workout. A workout is structured. It will start with a squat, followed by squat accessories, then bench, followed by bench accessories, and deadlift, followed by deadlift accessories. We do not sacrifice technique, and we do not sacrifice speed. A lot of people think we'll just blast through this.
Yeah.
But by doing this, what is provided another element, and we wrote about it. We look at volume load per minute, which is a really good correlation to colloquially how in shape the athlete is.
Yeah.
And once that percentage goes up, so for instance, their maintenance dose is between 2,500 and 3,500 pounds per minute, and going to competition would be about 4,000 to 4,500 pounds per minute. When it comes to the accessories, we are looking at stacking accessories so that it becomes harder as the workout goes on, as fatigue sets in. And we are looking between combining elements of specific stuff for weaknesses and also an element of muscle endurance or conditioning, stacking up.
A question I would have, and I think that should be mentioned that you could explain further, the volume lifted per minute and then the carryover that you've seen as far as focusing on training density of that particular day, that you're almost, you can develop cardiovascular output without having to directly focus on traditional cardiovascular training.
Yeah, and we didn't set out for that. It happened as a result of the training.
Yeah.
Simply because we don't have time to go sprint or run. They take care of other stuff, depending on the athlete in their training. Mm-hmm. But by taking the minutes, and what happened was we were doing this and it took us 75 minutes, and that's far too long because we have to increase weights, we have to progress in the accessories, but we can't have athletes for 90 minutes. 1, it kills the culture. 2, you kill the culture, they're not going to come back.
Yeah.
So we're like, okay, well, let's make a concerted effort to cut out rest periods or cut them down, and then let's see how density we can get the workout in. And as soon as it went from 75 to 60 minutes, after 3 weeks, the first 2 weeks was hard for them because they would go from that workout, go do their skill, and they were somewhat fatigued because it's a new stimulus. But after 3 weeks, there was no negative feedback coming back from the sport. In fact, they were able to acquire more skill or practice more skill because they weren't getting as fatigued. They were in better shape.
Yeah.
And it was just by the circumstances, we shrunk it down from 75 to 60. And now it's very rare that the combined dynamic effort day will go longer than 60 minutes.
Yeah.
And because we had heart rate monitors on them, they're going from zone 2 to zone 3 to max heart rate once to twice in this workout. And it is the workout that I think builds the most culture in the group, because you're going through objective adversity with the weights, which is helpful for the group. And now we have times. So they're always trying to beat their times every week. So they're moving 50, 55, and 60, plus accommodating resistance of 25% in the given lift. That doesn't change. Again, we are hammering home technique. We're not going so fast that technique is terrible. But then anyone who knows me, I'm not a huge stickler. I want 100% correct. If we're within 85 to 95% and not in danger, I'm fine with that.
And also technique fits the athlete, right?
Yeah, for sure. And Louis had a good point when we were doing power cleans, is that if they were not perfect, it gets you more brute strong.
True. You got to do more work if the rep's not perfect.
Because you're inefficient.
Yeah.
And then we're still picking out the accessories for weaknesses. And it got to a point where now our athletes come in, this is the day because they want to get the fastest time, the most load per minute. And it allows us to basically try out new aspects of conditioning and muscle endurance in an environment where we know they're done in 55 minutes or under. Like the fastest they got through a workout has been 32 minutes, all the way up to 55. And we're looking at loads per workout. A low one might be 110,000, all the way up to, we got one that's 350 to 400,000 pounds, which is a lot, but
incredible amount.
When you put sleds into a workout and you actually track sled data, that's where your volume comes in. Like sleds are just hugely important to get that in. But the concept is those 3 days and that combined dynamic effort will shape culture, And culture creates consistency, and consistency is where becomes champions. It allows the athletes to train speed, work and conditioning, have 2 other days, but it gives the athlete more to themselves. Now they have an extra day to focus on skill or to recover or to do whatever is important. And don't think they're just doing 3 workouts a week.
No.
There's
Talk
3.
about what they do after the session, how they go right to a martial arts gym to train.
So on Tuesday, the Jiu-Jitsu and MMA guys, they come in here, they train they get in at 7:45 to 8. We start at 8. They're done by 9 o'clock. Then they go over to Immortal, and then they roll from 10:30 to 11:30. They get lunch. Then they go to Ronan, and then from 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock, they do live. And that's their Tuesday.
And so all the people saying that that's not Westside, I don't know what's more Westside than that type of training schedule. That's a Westside mentality. That's a Westside work ethic.
Well, what's came up with working with the Jiu-Jitsu athletes, why this is so important, is there's no breaks. When they have an event, we're training all the way up to it. Because in Jiu-Jitsu, either you incur no damage or it's catastrophic.
Yeah, you broke off,
Yeah,
right?
there's nothing in between. MMA is different because you're actually getting punched in the face.
Yeah.
So there is an element of like,
There's always some damage, right?
Yeah, you have to. But with this, like with Dante, we've really dialed into where 5 days out, he's still training.
Yeah.
And then if we got weight to worry about, then 5 days to day of the
And that's
fight.
at the top end of the sport.
Yeah. But when he just competed at 1, when he finished his grappling match, he was doing the workout that night.
You mentioned that.
Not to lose consistency.
Yeah.
And like that's where I hold him in very high regard of being the most consistent training athlete we have. Everyone in here is consistent because they all want to be the best.
What's the requirement is sticking around here, right?
Yeah, but that 3-day system, there's 2 other days in between, which is plyometrics and postural.
Yep.
The trade-off for dynamic effort day was if we did true plyometric workouts within it, or exercises, it would slow it down too much.
Mm-hmm.
So by pulling them out and doing them as separate days, where still the total weekly volume is there, but at least you can focus on true plyometrics by getting enough break in between.
Yeah, without the fatigue being present.
Yeah, which is a huge thing.
Yeah. Got to have the output for it to be true plyometrics, right?
And there's a difference between training through fatigue and actually doing plyometrics.
Yeah.
So we'll still do 4 sets of 10 when they're fatigued, but the objective is not a plyometric.
Work capacity.
Yes,
yeah, it's
exactly.
Repeated effort.
And it's 2, it's to be able to work your mind when you're tired.
Yep.
So it helps your decision-making abilities. And the combined dynamic effort day, it actually helps athletes with strategy of how do I get through this workout while still hitting technique, still keeping it dense and intensity, but how can I get through it faster? Because week 1 to week 2 should be faster than week 1. That's your goal. So week 2 becomes heavier and faster, and week 3 is the heaviest and fastest. So when they first did it, they would go too fast on week 1. Because week 1 of a new cycle, you're learning the combination of lifts, how each one feels. Mm-hmm. So it sets the standard, and then week 2, you're beating it, and then week 3, you should be absolutely crushing that time. And we will very rarely come back to the same 3-week way of dynamic effort. We will change and rotate. It's still the same foundation, but the exercises very rarely will revisit what we've done. So every 3 weeks is something completely new. And for the past 24 months, we've never had the exact same dynamic effort cycle.
Now, you had asked earlier about introducing beginners to dynamic effort training. With the combined day, have you introduced, and if you have, do you have any recommendations? I'm sure some coaches are wondering, how do you introduce athletes new to this style of training, especially particularly high volume with the velocity parameters? How do you introduce that to a beginner level lifter?
Yeah, one is I don't have many beginners.
So most of the guys that come in, they've had weight training experience.
Yeah. So then I'm not the most qualified person to talk about beginners.
Most definitely.
But what I have noticed is people have a low level of strength. The accommodating resistance initially does not help.
I agree.
You have to build a base, and that's where we might do 6s or 8s instead of that, to build up that base with the foundational movements.
So
with
pretty
the compound.
much repeated effort work.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Accessories for sure. And then the intensity comes, like we're looking at the density, but the intensity, if there's too new, they're going to be too all over the place because they're trying to beat the time. And that will happen. You put a new group into it, they're like, oh, I want to get through this as fast as possible. And technique goes out the window, which is what we don't want, because then injury can occur. But back to that, if you have a base, it's perfect for you. If not, build that base, go to a traditional one if you have to, reduce your accessory work, get bench, squat, and deadlift down. Get to a point where you're strong enough to use accommodating resistance. And I would say maybe 135, depending on who you are, but you want to be at least benching, deadlifting, and squatting that to get something out of the smallest of bands we have.
The bands will take you for a ride if you're not strong enough. Yeah.
Because if not, you're going to have a brutal sticking point, and I wouldn't say the drawback, but with variable resistance, it's working on your strength curve.
Yeah.
So where you're at your weakest, you're not improving that aspect with band tension. That's where straight weight is very important.
Yep. And also the fatigue that comes with using accommodating resistance. People don't understand. Bands can really, to put it in just simple terms, they'll kick your ass. So if you're not prepared and ready for that, because it's the eccentric forces that people don't realize that you have to deal with when the band's loading, as you approach a box or hit the chest. It's a higher level of force output just because the overspeed eccentric.
The great thing with bands for dynamic effort, you can give maximal intent to that band. You can lift as hard and as fast as you can, and the band's going to give it back to you.
Yep.
And it really is great in teaching intent.
Yeah.
What I like about chains, when you use chains, it's huge for stability.
Certainly.
Bands, people can find a groove.
Yeah.
With chains, you don't have that.
Nope. Reinforces technique, certainly.
Yeah, that's where I like the value of rotating in chains. I'm not a big fan of chains and deadlifts, mostly because the setup is
it's difficult
terrible.
to get right. Yeah.
But for squat and bench, it's huge. And rotating them in and out. But we definitely do, I would 70% is going to be with bands, and then rotate in chains.
Now, another question I have, because something we do with in the strength training world, as far as I'm saying, powerlifting focused, strongman focused, in our 3-week wave, oftentimes the accessory volume will taper towards the third week, right? Because the third week's going to be incredibly demanding. So, for instance, if I'm doing 4 accessory exercises week 1, it might only be 2 on week 3. Do you guys taper accessories? Does volume kind of stay consistent?
We don't. In fact, we increase some variable of the accessory. So we might increase weight. We might add a couple more reps. Mm-hmm. Something will change every week. So they're building capacity. There's nothing coming off. And I think when you're looking at strength athletes, the weights are
it's
a
the
lot
max
higher.
I want to add that in quick. So the reason we do taper is, Friday and Saturday, that's our dynamic effort days. We've got max effort come Monday. And even, upper dynamic effort will still kick your ass for lower Monday because your upper back's taxed. You can't carry the bar as well. You're rounding in the upper back. So a lot of times we taper because of, like you said, the intensity of the max effort can be high. The training weights are higher.
And when you're in the gym, it's very close to, it is. It's skill too. Because
it's practice. Their practice is at the martial arts gym. Our practice is in the gym actually. GPP versus SPP, right?
And we're looking at the wave. Like the waves is huge, so we're going up and up and up. It's not just the compound movements, the accessories. Something has to do there. And then the other aspect is we're trying to shorten the time. Yeah. So we're doing a lot in one session, but the carryover to the athletes has been huge. Like our athletes, we pride ourselves on what separates our crew the most is that their goal is to never get tired, is to set the pace so that they can outlast. Skill-wise, that's on them and the skill coaches. I couldn't tell them how to do anything skill-wise. Yeah. But when it comes to having more access to themselves, is that you train with the intent that you can outlast your opponent. Yep. And that goes into every training session. Like they come in here, they train hard for the purpose of their event it was a lot easier. So most of our athletes will say dynamic effort is the hardest thing they will ever do, even compared to their sport.
Even on the strength side, it's the same. That. Friday is, especially for guys that are new here, Friday was always that big test day. Are they going to make it? And sometimes it takes a couple months before you actually aren't out in the parking lot puking, as you've seen people do.
There's that. And then you're dealing with the anxiety of turning up. This day's going to suck.
Yeah. It's very competitive.
100%.
Very competitive.
You don't want to be late. You don't want to be the weakest person. You don't want to be the slowest person.
Nope.
Because if not, then you're going to deal with crap.
Especially in that athlete group, they're pretty brutal with their pressure they put on the weak. You know what I mean?
And they hold themselves to a high standard, and they want everyone to rise up.
Yes, they do.
Back to Lou, a chain is only as strong as the weakest link.
It is.
So your goal is to bring up that weakest link. Mm-hmm. And that's when people come visit, they have a hard time. They start off strong, but when you're 15 minutes into this, now you're in deep water. Can you keep treading? Like most of them can't. Mm-hmm. Because they think they train, but they actually work out. These guys train. But that 3-day system has been huge in the fact that it gives back another day to them based on what they need.
Yeah. Well, and with the practice schedule they maintain, the 3 days makes the most sense.
And they can only get the most out of the workouts based on the amount of back-end recovery they do.
Certainly.
Recovery gives you a huge amount of bandwidth to get more out of your actual workouts. Mm-hmm. You can't burn the candle at both ends.
It's intelligent load management.
Yeah. And the same with sleep, diet, and nutrition. All that stuff combines into everything. Sleep is a huge part. And you can tell when someone comes in tired. But the other aspect of it too, we are really training our athletes to be the best possible athlete on the worst possible day. Because you're going to compete when you're sick. You're going to compete when stuff's happening in your life. It doesn't matter. You can't go, hey, can't turn up today. Like, okay, you don't get a paycheck, especially in MMA or Jiu-Jitsu.
Yeah.
In a singular sport, team sports, you got different. You have substitutions. There's no substituting for individual sports.
No. No, you'll get exposed in the bright lights, right? They'll see
real
it.
Quick.
Yeah.
Other than that, any other questions?
Honestly, you kind of covered all the basics, I think, especially for guys. I think the biggest thing that most coaches will just want to know is, how would you transition from 4 to 3? Just go straight to it? Would there be a type of a transition phase, or?
That's a good question. We just went straight to it.
Did you?
And I said we went to a 5, to a 2. We even went to a 1.
How was the first week when the guys were hit with all that volume at once?
They crushed them. It crushed them because we didn't know how it was going to work out. They got through the dynamic effort. They were crushed. And when I first started it too, my parameters was, Louis said it's pretty hard to overtrain these guys. And I took that on board and went way too far in, too much volume.
Testing your limits, but you have to sometimes.
Well, like there was training sessions when Matt Brown was still here where we were doing 120 minutes.
Yeah. Which
is insane.
Especially if you're making a high volume, high density workout. It's a lot of work.
And then they're going back and then have to do their skill set on top of that.
Yep.
But we're finding now, we found the system we have after 3 weeks, you've adapted to it, not accommodated, you've adapted to the workload, and now you reap what you sow. However, if you take your foot off the gas, if you take more than 7 days out, you're going to notice yourself at a huge deficit in the rest of the group.
Yeah.
So it's something that you actually have to keep, and that's why the jiu-jitsu guys, they don't stop. MMA guys, we have ways that we might keep major compound lifts off them, but we'll still do accessories when they're coming back, depending on their injury, of course. But 3 weeks for the advanced athletes has been, you get through that, but then you're crushing training because you're just not getting as tired, and you're getting more access to yourself. And if your fatigue level is low, it's way easier to acquire a new skill and practice a new skill when you're not tired. When you're tired, you're going to fight or flight.
Yep. You're not really thinking the process through at that point. Surviving.
Cool. All right. I think that wraps it for this episode. Until next time, thank you, Burley.
Thank you, man.